and then I'll do a formal introduction in a second. But is there anything new to your bio that I should know before I just say it as what I know?
Oh God, I don't know what you've got.
I just have
So
the back of
just
the book and from your website. So it's you're the co-founder and director of Global Center for Conscious Leadership.
mm,
And that's okay. And
yeah,
then
yeah. I mean that's all still holds true.
okay, you've worked with leaders across the world for the past 20 years, developing their capacity to lead with more awareness, wisdom, and choice.
Mm,
Okay, so I'm just reading off the
that's
back
it.
of the book.
Cool.
Okay, so
That will work fine.
and I don't have an agenda. I don't have a
Mm,
place to go. I just I'll ask a few questions, but like we were talking last week, I would like it to be a
yeah,
conversation. Yeah, okay. But
yeah. Let's talk what we took last week.
okay. So I am really excited not only to share my friend Gina with anybody who's listening, but to have the conversation that I get to have with Gina. And you just happen to be listening if you're listening on the podcast. So Gina Hayden is, oh man, I first met you, Gina, a couple of years ago when I discovered your book, Becoming a Conscious Leader. And I found out from the person who told me about your book, I asked her just a couple weeks ago, how did you find this book? And she said, I Googled conscious leadership and it just came up. So it was random, if you will, that I even found the book in the first place. But now that I've found you, it's beyond the book. But for those of you who don't know Gina, she has worked with leaders across the world for the past 20 years, developing their capacity to lead with more awareness, wisdom, and choice. She is co-founder of the Global Center for Conscious Leadership and a director of Conscious Capitalism UK. And as soon as she talks, you will know she's not in the United States. Gina, Gina.
Thank you, Jodie. Thank you. And I'm remembering this Facebook message I got from you on my messenger going, I'm just reading your book and I'm enjoying it so much. And then you saying, I thought I was the only one. You said, I'm in the middle of the US, in the middle of the US. And I thought, oh my heavens, I thought I was the only one. And it's so fantastic to read that there are other people who think like I do. And I was
You
like,
remember
yes,
that? Oh,
I remember that because I was like, you're exactly the person I was hoping the book would reach. Yeah. And yeah, there's still lots of people who are saying that. I think they're saying, is it only me who's thinking that this can't be all there is? They're saying things like, oh, is everyone else like me? Am I the only one in my company who thinks like this? Am I going mad? COVID has changed everything. Yeah, so I think it's how do we help people find friends who are a lot like them, who think about things in the same way. Yeah,
I love that. How do we help people find friends? Oh, because COVID, we talked, Gina and I had a conversation last week just to catch up because Gina has been on my podcast before in my previous version of my podcast, which was called Bach Talks. It's now called Circle Up and Get Real. So we talked a while ago and then we talked last week just to catch up. And friends, I love that you said that because you live in the UK. I've never met you in person, yet I feel closer to you than I feel to people I see every day in a weird kind of way.
Yeah, in a weird kind of way. I think that's right. I think something happens. There's like a mutual recognition that happens when we talk to someone else. And I was writing about this day and thinking about this day. There's like how do I put it? I can't find it right now. It's like yeah, it's there's a mutual recognition. I think when we talk with other people and they recognize themselves in us and we recognize ourselves in them, and we realize we care about the same things and we're walking on the same path, and it feels there's a kind of a recognition in that I think just feels like, oh. I was doing this thing the other day. Somebody I know in my network had, in fact, it was around the book. She had a book club linked to one of the London women's clubs. You know, you can just imagine, and there's kind of very savvy bunch of professional businesswomen, and she said, can you come and do a kind of an hour with these people who are reading the book? So we just had this hour on Zoom, and we were just talking, and these were a diverse group of people, diverse group of women, all in business in various ways, some big jobs, some smaller jobs. And they were just talking about what they'd read and from the research in the book. And I was asking about them and sharing my stories, my experience. But the feeling on the call was like, it was like friends, right? It's like, here, this thing, I see you and I'm being seen. And I think the feeling was like, it's sort of like your heart drops down a bit more, because you're like, okay, I feel home. I feel seen. I feel I'm seeing other people. I feel connected. And for me, I was like, God, nothing beats that feeling, right? How do we create more of that feeling around the world? That would be the coolest thing to do. How do we create more people who feel that?
We're doing it. I mean, that's what has really intrigued me about COVID, because we would have, I don't know, I suppose looking back in March, when did it hit England?
February, but March we started taking it seriously.
Okay. Yeah. So, some of us still haven't taken it seriously here. So, so back March, April, February, March, let's say, I had no idea what was going. I would have never been able to imagine this slowdown of the entire world. And if we think about that I mean, there are lots of ways to think about that, but for me, it was an amazing opportunity to get connected. And the fact that you and I can feel connected and as friends, even though we are across, I mean, we're countries, worlds apart, really. That doesn't matter in COVID to me. I mean, that's what I've learned about COVID.
Yeah.
Are you experiencing that too?
I completely agree. I think COVID has been all about forgetting about all of the things that we thought about ourselves that we used to take so seriously. And certainly for me, that's been my experience about all my ideas about myself. I was telling you this last week, right? It's kind of the sense of identity, the sense of what I was associated with. It's like, actually, COVID just like shook that. And now I think people are asking themselves different kinds of questions, like, do I really want to be getting on a plane all the time and racing around the world? Do I want to be working all the hours God sends? Because I kind of enjoyed being with my family during this time, notwithstanding the fact that there's been so much suffering this year, and many people have had huge amounts of suffering. So not diminishing that in any way. But a lot of people that I speak to, many of the people I'm working with in organizations, are saying, what I do know is I don't want to go back to that pretend life that I'm this sort of corporate person, and then my family is somewhere off stage that I kind of go to either when I have time, or I'm always fighting to have time, but I definitely keep them separate from what's happening on the business stage. And I think if there's a theme for me from 2020, I think it's around connection. I feel more connected to my family, much more, because I'm more present and I'm just here. I don't want that to change. And people I speak to are saying, like, I've come back to valuing what it is that matters to me in my life. And this kind of, that I was reading about and listening to this podcast this morning when they were talking about this notion of Maya, this kind of Indian notion of this illusion, right, that we all live in. And it feels like we were all sort of like living in this matrix dream world Maya kind of state of kind of going through things. That was my experience, feeling like, well, I'd like to stop, but I don't think I could stop, because I have to keep going, because how this works is I have to keep going to do the work, because the work involves going on a plane to somewhere. And luckily for me, COVID has just gone and swept that out the way. And now I get to say, so how do we do this online? How do we connect with each other? How do we create space for each other and hold space for one another, so we can explore what's important to us, how we can be leaders in the world in this way, which is a much more human way, perhaps. I think maybe COVID has made us more human, because it's brought us closer to the suffering and the love and the connection. Yeah.
Well, if you think about that, there's a couple of questions I have about Maya. I'd like to go back and talk about that in a second, but it just occurred to me that if in your physical space, you haven't been able to find a tribe that you can connect with in real life, like in person, real life.
Yeah.
COVID has made our world so much smaller. And I connect with you and with somebody in India and someone, I mean, it doesn't even matter where we live physically because we're connected energetically and spiritually, which goes way beyond what we thought, like you said earlier, what was most important. And we've been forced.
Give me 1 second. This is my daughter.
Oh, please.
I'm going to quickly put you.
Yes. Hi, Jess. Tell Jess hi.
This is the world that Jess is like, can you give me a gig of data?
Oh my goodness.
I can't give you a gig of data now, my darling. I'm just on a call.
Right now I can but you can.
But I can't, oh, it's going to take 5 minutes. I said, come back, I'll give it to you at 5. But this is the thing, just back to this COVID thing very briefly. And I mean, I don't mind you putting this in the recording.
Yeah.
This is exactly the example that I've been experiencing with my clients, where before you'd kind of have off stage, right? You're like, shh, don't take the call. Now I've got, what have we done? We've got these screens. I don't know what it's been like in the States. For my global clients, we've been talking to people. They've got their 3-year-old on their lap because what the heck do you do, right? Like you can't. So they've got their coloring in with the left hand, doing the kind of pricing actuarial stuff on the right hand, or whatever it is. Having the call, and it's just kind of all right. We're all human together. And so, whereas before I would have been kind of mortified at the call, but now I'm just like, oh yeah, hi Jess, I can't give you data, I'll speak to you later. And I think there's something like, where these whole people connecting. So back to your point around online, I think it does feel two-dimensional, right? It does. Like I think there is, particularly for development work, where you're in a room with a group of people and it's about creating some space for them to explore, who they want to be and to connect with each other. And certainly to do some skills practice around being a more effective leader, for example. It's much more 3D than online is, but there is a quintessential quality of online, of being human together, that I think we recognize, that seems to transcend time and space. And it's like you feel it, right? It's the same way that we feel it. We've never met, but we feel in it together. We feel human together.
Yeah.
So you're right. Like India, you can talk to someone. India, you talk to me, or wherever, and we have this big community that's enabled by COVID and online.
So bottom line, what connects us is our humanity, not our politics, not our ideologies, not our religions, none of that, because everything else is separate. What connects us is at the very basis of who we are is our humanity. And when we lose that, we're losing that. I'm in the States. We're losing that right now because we're starting to see people as objects, and we're starting to categorize them, especially politically, into one camp or the other. And what's happening is we're focusing on our differences. And we're seeing them because what we focus on, we see, right? And so we're only focusing on our differences, and we're forgetting that what you just said about the 3-year-old on the lap and Jess calling in the middle of a podcast, which we would have said, oh my gosh, I'm recording this, you can't do this, right? And that's so to your point about the connection piece, I'm not afraid, I'm not worried, I'm not in fear about the separation. I'm in gratitude for the awareness of the separation, because then I can do something about it, whether that exists in my physical space or if it exists on a third dimension, if it, or a fifth dimension, if we're going to talk about that at some point. I mean, consciousness doesn't have an end point.
I think we really need to ask ourselves, all of these ideas that are layered on top of who we are as human beings at our core, do they really matter? Like, does it really matter that your belief is different to my belief? And is it really necessary that I have to go, well, I'm right and you're wrong, on the basis of a belief system, which is nothing other than air, right? It's particles, it's thoughts. It's like you couldn't measure it. It's a gas. It doesn't even exist. And yet it drives our behavior. It drives that separation that you refer to. It makes us act like we're not of the same human race. And I mean, first of all, I think that's just crazy and ludicrous. Like, why do, of course, it's a human condition, but why do we do that? At the end, we take that all away, we're human together. So I think this time, and I'm thinking a lot about this lately, this time of massive separation, how do we, and I sent you that podcast last week, but I'm sitting with these questions, you know, how do I stay grounded right now in how I want to be open in this world, but not of this world. So I'm not driven by the circumstances outside me. I'm not getting triggered all the time. Like, how do I just stay open, quiet, not adding fuel? I'm not like, you know, spraying petrol on the fire to make it burn. God, I don't want to live a life where it's all about the flame and the fury, and I'm just like adding in the flame and the fury. Who the hell wants to live a life like that, right? So how do we keep ourselves just open and calm, and recognizing how different things are and recognizing the sticking points that we have, but ultimately at the bottom of that, just realizing it's human beings. I've been talking to my partner of it feels, and this, I borrowed this quote, but it's feeling a lot like it. You know, as a human beings, are we a failed experiment? Are we a failed experiment? And you know, so we're born, so whatever happens, I don't know what people's beliefs are, and like they're going to be different too. We each have different beliefs, and it's okay. And here we are in this world, and if you want to subscribe to the kind of, you know, souls inhabiting bodies point of view, then like, how are we doing on that front? Are we passing the test? And how do we get better at being human on Earth? How do we get better at doing it? And I think for me, it's got to do with not reacting to other people, particularly on the basis of political beliefs and things which really are designed to divide us. I don't know if you watched that Netflix program recently on the social dilemma. Yeah, I think I was talking about last week.
Yes.
I mean, you look at, anyone who's listening, watch that program, because it makes you think or realize, like, oh wow, I'm kind of, you know, my chain is being pulled by algorithms that don't really care about my well-being at all, and no one's really taking responsibility for that. And I'm just in an echo chamber of things that tell me what I want to know. I don't think that's the way to live. That's a very unconscious way to live.
However, what if we could teach the algorithm to give us higher consciousness by clicking on what we do want instead of what keeps us separate? Because the algorithm, there's no meaning to the algorithm. It doesn't mean anything.
Yes. It's completely kind of unbiased, really. It's not alive, right? I was wondering, I was wondering that same thing. It's like, can you actually sort of, you kind of teach it? I was like, can you sort of, like, you know, sabotage the algorithm is what I was thinking. Can you go in there and actually, you know, so you start just clicking on the echo chamber of things you love, and can that voice get louder than the hatred?
It does. It's what happened. I didn't realize that other people see things differently than I do because of what they're inundated with. And so this political divide, I live in a very red state, which is very Republican, Trump supporting, and I am not in that camp, not because Donald Trump is a bad person, but because my ideology does not align with his. So as I grow in awareness, I also grow in compassion. And so for me, I don't see it as let's find fuel for the fire, as you were saying. I'm looking at things much differently, and I'm clicking on things much differently. And so my Facebook feed is very different than other people when I see them in real life and they're like, "Did you see that? That's so bad." And that keeps showing up for me. And I'm like, well, it doesn't show up for me. And I think it's because I've been really conscious for several years in looking at what I do want, not what I don't. And so you can train it.
You know, that you're reminding me of something it's actually was in the book, but I've forgotten the quote. It was by Patricia Aberdeen, who wrote a book, 2010, The Rise of Conscious Capitalism.
Yeah.
So like kind of like way ahead of her time. And she wrote a line which was, technology is consciousness externalized. Which I think is possibly, given what you've just said there, reminds me probably more true now than ever before. That technology, because I look at people who are on and apologies to any one of your listeners or watchers who might be, you know, pro anti-vaccine. I look at that from my point of view, like, but why would you march for that? Or why would you go in a throng in the central London or wherever and actually get together and expose yourself more to a virus? And can you really believe that this virus doesn't exist? So in my reality, I'm like, what? But actually, I can see the fact that if you had surrounded yourself with that kind of information, you might be completely convinced that that's the reality. So technology has driven that, right? And I think the point made in The Social Dilemma is nobody knows what's true anymore. I was reading about Trump this morning with the taxes, and the first thing he said was, oh, that's fake news. And it's a tricky one, because you could probably pass everything off as fake news these days. So how do we know it's true? So I think maybe we probably have to take responsibility for what we choose, what we click on, what reality we create for ourselves.
So I have a theory about that, and I can't prove this yet, but my theory is from my own experience. I used to believe that the only way to get real information was through books, as you can see, my thousands of books, because I thought the only way that I could get my own validity was to know more than other people. So I filled my head with a whole bunch of knowledge. And so I would make decisions based on the knowledge I had in my head, but I would discount my heart and my gut, which are two other places that we can have discernment. So what I did in 2020, at the very beginning, like right away in 2020, I decided that 2020, the year, was going to be about vision and focus for me. And so I decided that I was going to line up what I call the I's: intellect, intuition, which is connection to higher intelligence, and instinct, which is gut. So line up the I's: intellect, intuition, instinct. And if I can line those up and stay in that space of discernment before I decide what's true, what's right, what's, what works, or whatever the criteria is, that's helped me so much, because I don't have to rely only on one of the three. Intellect.
How have you done that? How have you tapped into those three?
I stop. Whenever I feel triggered, I feel something and it feels different from what I choose, what I would prefer. I have to say, what is that for me? What is that for me? What is that for me? And mostly I'm getting out of my head and into my heart. And for me, that's a change. I'm growing in compassion. And I don't know why this morning I picked up this book off my shelf, which is Man's for Ultimate Meaning, which is his second. So
I didn't know.
So Viktor Frankl is taking what he learned in Man's Search for Meaning and making it more of a, he calls it religious, but more, it's taking it to another level. So Ultimate Meaning explores the sometimes unconscious basic human desire for inspiration or revelation, and illustrates how life can offer profound meaning at every turn. And so what I just read this morning was kind of what you said about how do we know if our perspective is, how can you walk into something and say, how could they believe that? And what's really interesting is when you get to the higher dimension, this is what he says in the book: a higher dimension by definition is a more inclusive one. the lower dimension is included in the higher one. It is subsumed in it and encompassed by it. So when you get higher consciousness, I think you have to grow in compassion. If they're at a lower consciousness and they're not believing in fake news and they're believing that my way is the only way, they don't see it from a higher perspective yet.
And it's based in fear, right?
It is totally
that whole totally based in fear. That sense of I fear loss. I fear being overpowered, so I'm going to go for control and power over in order to manage. Whereas that higher order living is based on love and unity and inclusiveness. And I think my perspective on it would be the fear is the kind of underside of things, or the lower vibrational field. So now we get into an interesting place. This work by David Hawkins, called Power and Force, right? So there's sort of that dimension, those variations of kinesiology and which emotions vibrate at certain levels. And I was looking at this the other day, and shame is the lowest one. And then you've kind of got the more energized, guilt is also down there, that kind of like make myself small. And then you've got the kind of agitated energies like anger and envy and greed and stuff. And then you kind of get into creativity, and then into love, and then into unity. And the unity hurts is much higher than the fear hurts.
Hurts, H-E-R-T-Z, hurts.
H-E-R-T-Z, yes,
not H-U-R-T-S.
As I said it, yeah. Just your thing about the decision making, though. If we can just go back to that, I interviewed a very fascinating guy once. So he was very interesting. He had this. First of all, he was born a very knowing. He had like that knowing, right? That knowing wisdom, and he'd done very well in business. And interestingly, as an aside, he'd had this kind of breakthrough experience, what might be called a kind of an enlightenment experience. Anyway, they kind of like that where you wander around the world like Eckhart Tolle, sort of like what's just happened, but I mean a state of joy, right? And he had that for about 2 weeks, and he didn't know like what sense to make of that, and had done some work to make sense of it. He was saying, I think before this happened, that he had this knowingness that he'd sort of half learned and half come with, or kind of born with, which was that he kept making the right decisions for business. So he was very successful. I think he was some kind of financier or something. And what he said was, the way I make decisions is I first go with my gut. Like, does it feel right? Is it sitting comfortably with me? And if it feels like it's settled on my stomach, then I go to my heart and I ask myself, does it make me happy? And if it makes me happy, only then do I go to my head and say, does this make sense from a business perspective? And he said every time he'd not followed that process, he'd fallen foul of it. And he said, even when there were two options, and the one was way more of a rational approach than this one. If this one lined up with his heart and his gut, and he went with this one, even logically it made no sense or less sense, this one would end up being a failure and this one would end up being a success. So I always remember that story, because I think, he really kind of got the kind of conscious decision-making process. He was talking a lot about that.
Well, and that is a fascinating way to think about it, the conscious decision-making process, because until you have a way to articulate it consciously, it remains subconscious, unconscious. And it's these two, gut and heart, are they don't have consciousness and articulation. So you have to bring it to your consciousness to articulate that.
And you know where they come out. Well, I think where they come out is in your physiology. So personal reflection for me, my journey over time has been, I used to have this survival driver, this kind of, it was down to me. I had to make sure I was the provider. I mustn't be caught short with not having provided, la, 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 la. And so I was always saying yes. I had a work hard ethic, right? Work hard all the time, work. And I used to say yes to anything as a consultant that would give me the income, because I'm like, oh God. And this was the litany. And it got to the point where I was like, even when I didn't enjoy it, I still kept saying yes, because and then one day a few years ago, this email comes through while I'm on holiday with my daughter, and it's like, we've got this work that's coming up next year. It's probably going to be about 8 or 12 weeks away over the course of the year, at a week at a time. And it's like my heart just went and my stomach just sank. And what went through me is like, I cannot do this. Like, I don't know. This I think is the point. I don't know what the answer is, but I have to trust that there is something on the other side of this, because all I know is I physiologically cannot say yes to this thing, because it just makes my heart sink through my boots. And I did say no, and it was the first time I'd ever said no in a consulting capacity to anything, because we live and die by the work that we get in. But I had my heart and my gut spoke to my physiology, so I said no. I couldn't drag myself there. And as it happened, it was all okay, right? Trusting life, it was all okay. And then fast forward a few years, I remember working out in New York with this company, and they were a bunch of kind of management consultants from kind of very logical, rational backgrounds. And they didn't relate very much to me and kind of some of the stuff we're talking about. And I was trying to fit myself in a different box in order to make. And I just thought, why am I doing this work? And this guy that I work with, who's based in India, he just, why are you doing the work? And I found myself, well, I've got to do it just in case. And when I let that go, that also kind of, I just couldn't do that anymore. And so here I found myself in 2020, we were talking last week about this year, where it's been a whole year of resting and just allowing things to be as they are and not forcing them. Because it feels to me maybe a bit like we're getting ready for something that's coming in the future, or maybe we need to kind of hold space for other people, or I think we need to be in a kind of a grounded place to be bringing the right kind of energy, the right kind of attitude into the world. And I think if we're running and we're rushing and we're coming from fear and we're like chasing, oh heavens, I better go for that, even though I don't really want to go. I don't think, I'm hoping that's not going to be the way of the new world.
Well,
next year.
We have a lot of evidence to prove what does happen when we do change. We already know that, and I don't know if in England you're doing this, but we're talking about the new normal. Let's find the new no, the normal wasn't working. We don't want to go back. What I'm learning about fixing things, it puts them back to the way they were. No fixing. We're creating from nothing right now. We have to be creating from nothing, because otherwise we're going to get more of the same. And the benefit, I don't know what the word is, the amazingness that you bring to the world from the work you've been doing is it's already at a higher consciousness. What you've been doing is by its nature already at a higher consciousness. So when people are now looking for something, why would they not choose the higher consciousness that you've already been in? And that's the foundation you can build on a higher ground.
I really hope
Not hoping.
that's what we do.
Not hoping for.
That's
right.
It will be.
You and I are doing this, Gina. It's not about hope. Hope is not a strategy.
We're doing this. I guess it's like the genie's out the bottle. The people I talk to in companies, they'll say, I've realized what's important to me. And then I've been talking to them lately. Now we're going into our second wave here. I don't know about you guys. And so it was kind of a month ago, people like, oh, they suddenly got busy again. And there was that temptation to just go back to like the way it was. I'm working hard. And then second wave is coming. Now people are slowing down again and beginning to think about, well, what does this really mean? I just hope that, well, it'll be what it'll be. Maybe there's a different question. How do we keep walking alongside people who want to stay in the space of seeing, who want to stay in the space of being more awake and aware, who want to explore living the way that they really want to live. I was thinking this morning that maybe there's no getting there. Maybe it's just people like us walking over the bridge with other people who are thinking, I wonder, I'm trying to make sense of things. And then maybe we just come back again from that and come back and just walk with more people.
Yeah.
And that doesn't mean that we're perfect. Like we keep learning as well, right? But maybe there's just a process of walking alongside people who just who are seeking and who want to keep evolving. And maybe our job is to create communities of people so we can find each other, so we can connect. I think this call's theme is around connection, isn't it? It's around connection and being human together. I'm looking at Get Real behind you, like that's it really, right?
It is. It is for
being
me.
Human together.
In the way I see it, the way you've just described it, the bridge, I think we just hold the flashlight. It's not like we know better. We might be holding a flashlight, but we're all being lit by the same light, right? I mean, it could be dark. It could be dark on the sides, but going forward where we're going, we have the opportunity to see a pothole first, and maybe we go through it first, maybe those of us, and we say, oh, wait a second, don't do that one because there's a pothole. But if you choose to do the pothole, you'll learn something, and it's your choice. Just so you know.
Or even like I fell in it last time, just to let you know.
Right, exactly. And you can do it, have your own experience for sure, but let me tell you that here's what I've learned. I think
this is what I've heard.
It's not a judgment at all. It's just like you said, it's not a judgment. It's just bringing more people, because you said you're allowing them to live the life they want to live. If they want the opportunity of integrating their home life and their work life, if they want that, you can be the guide for that. You're not going to be the guide for put your head down and keep working, because it's not what's lighting you up. So that
it's not what's lighting me up. Yeah.
It's not for the whole.
For some people, and for some people it will, right? For some people, they probably can't wait. I know some people I talk to, they're like, can I just get back to the office so I can get some normality in my life? Yeah. I think so this year it's been an interesting year, and kind of where I'm just from a personal journey perspective, of course, it's been a crazy year for all of us. It feels to me like the best thing we can do, those of us who work in this space, is to just be very still and very grounded and very open. Like I was saying, just be available to whoever comes in, maybe who life delivers into this, towards us. And because there is something about the quality of the connection, when you have that human, it's like, we see each other. When you have that, there's nothing better than that. For me, there's no better human experience than that. If I could spend all my days in that kind of way, that would be just really awesome. And because I think I grow from it and others grow from it, we feel connected, we feel human together. So I think if there's anything I do, it's needing to stay grounded and connected and open. And I'm far less needing to get anywhere or needing things to be any certain way than I was last year. And really, it's more around, let me just see what turns up. And I'm finding the more I'm in this place, the more things are just turning up. People who want to have a particular kind of conversation, or I had this most unbelievably good conversation last, maybe the day after I spoke to you last week, so this is a CEO of a very large company, global company, who really is on the cusp of moving jobs for various reasons, but he's really exploring his life and what this means for him and where it takes him next. And the conversation that we had together, I think we just both grew from. There's like me, and then there's you, and then there's this, if we could call it source if we wanted, or whatever, that emerges between us when you and I are on the same, in the right sort of space, the right frequency space maybe. but these like other things got spoken between us that we both benefit from, as like oxygen for both of us. And so I think that's what I mean. Like, how do we stay in that space of not knowing, not having figured it all out, not having a worldview which is a right worldview, and we're trying to convince and persuade everyone else's right view. Like, how do we just get out of the way and just like stay in the same space that we can be available to what needs to happen and available to the work that needs to be done?
You know how we had this conversation last week and we hadn't really connected for a year or so, and then when we got together last week, it was just instantaneous. You felt it, I felt it, and each of us felt that space that you were just describing. And if you and I as consultants are worried about how we are going to do that, all we have to do is get back together in the space of people who are already there, and then there's no doing involved. It's just holding space for our beings, right? To I don't know, get filled back up so that we can go do the things we have to do as consultants, but come back to the source, or come back to the spring, the well, whatever analogy we want to use, because you and I and people like us have work to do in the world that feels less like work, the way you were describing it earlier, have to do this, and more like an allowing. And to me, it feels too easy sometimes, that then I discount its value. When you were talking about the CEO you were talking to, and about how he needed to come to a place where he could be filled back up.
Yeah, that was exactly it.
And you said you benefited from that as well. And so the work we're doing in just holding that space without an agenda is a gift. And we maybe discount it because it's easy. And it's supposed to be hard if it's work, right?
Exactly right. And I know that feeling so well. It's supposed to, mine was, you're supposed to be working hard. Like, working hard is good. Not working hard is lazy. Like, I know this programming very well. I'm trying to let that go a lot of times. And you're right. Like, actually, what if it was just joyful and easy? What if it was about letting go rather than grasping and snatching? If I look at this conversation with this guy, so what's going to happen, right? He was changed by and through that conversation, not because I was doing anything to him or being clever or anything. It was because I was in a space and he was in a space, and then between us, stuff was coming out that became real for us. That means he goes away changed. That means he is different in his company. That means even if he leaves this company and goes somewhere else, he's different in the other company. And that means he influences and impacts the thousands of people in his organization to show up differently, to value themselves differently. I mean, he's really done amazing work in this space. So how do we, I'd like to have more of those conversations with leaders of companies who are up for the conversation of being fundamentally changed, and exploring that space together. And then they get to have this ripple effect across their organizations. And in the people I've spoken to and the kind of research that I've done, it goes out beyond the boundaries of the organization. They go home changed into their families. The communities are different as a result. So there's a question around really leaders of companies, businesses. Your impact is huge, so how much are you thinking about that, and what kind of responsibility are you taking for that, and what kind of responsibility do you want to have? Because you're going to have an effect, like chosen or unchosen, you're going to have an effect.
And if that word responsibility feels heavy to you as an impactor of a lot of people, could we shift that word just so that it could feel less heavy to you? Because if we choose not to take on responsibility because it feels too heavy, let's call it an opportunity then. Let's just call it something different. And to be able to offer that space to somebody so that they can remain light, remain, in the higher vibration.
That's true.
Because otherwise,
you're right. You're right to pick it up. I mean, responsibility can feel very heavy, like some kind of burden, right?
It doesn't have to.
Maybe it doesn't have to. Maybe there's a realization that I'm thinking about the butterfly effect. Somebody else I was working with, I think what happens when you're at a very senior level in an organization is you have minions, right? The minions just run around doing things for you, and you kind of have an idea, and then you happen to articulate the idea as a stream of consciousness. And then the minions feel they better run with it and go and produce, a PhD with your idea. And all you wanted was a memo, right? And this happens a lot. So there's something just about the awareness of the ripple effect that you have, the butterfly effect that you create. And what do you want to do with that? Maybe your thing about opportunity. What's the opportunity here?
And if they don't have a place, they up here don't have a place to articulate those ideas without having the minions think they need to create the PhD, then
Yes.
there are a lot of PhDs out there that didn't need to be created. And up here, that's the creative conversation that didn't exist without having the space to iterate it. And so your job as a consultant, my job as a consultant and coach is to allow that space for people, but they have to know it's a possibility before they know to choose it. And so there's the marketing piece that needs to come in, right? How do people know that this is what they can expect or hope for by just
hope for? And there's a lot of work to be done around that. And again, work sounds like a hard thing, but there's a lot of possibilities there. You're making me think about that the guy, we've probably spoken about this before, that I had this lead I interviewed, and so I grew up in South Africa. I might even have spoken about this last time on your podcast, and I grew up in a time of apartheid, so it was a very difficult time, and he had grown up also in South Africa at the same time. We're about the same age, very different side of the tracks, right? Very different kind of life that he had. He'd done extremely well in business. And he was heading up this massive multinational. And his question was around success and significance. This is about the impact he wanted to have. And he was taking the opportunity to shape something in the world beyond him. So his question was how do I coach? How do I get my people coached and thinking about not just their success, but also their significance? Because if they're in touch with that, which is purpose and values and who I'm being in the world, then they will go out to their families and be different. They'll go out to their communities and be different. And he saw the opportunity then to provide a chance for people in his company to think differently about how they showed up in the company and outside the company. And I think that's an amazing opportunity if you embrace that as a leader. Like what becomes possible then? What can you create for the people who work in your company to be different?
And then when that is possible, the work that's done by the CEO or the coach or the consultant is not a telling, because otherwise it becomes an ego thing, right? It's, I'm going to tell you what to do. It's an allowing, like you said earlier. And the space that's created for the allowing is where creation comes in, right? And then he can say, as the CEO, I had an idea about what we were doing in our company, but that person over there who had the space to come up with something enhanced it, made it even better.
And I think you're pointing at something there. The leaders that I've spoken to who would be, let's call it conscious leaders, leaders who are operating in a way that they're in command of themselves, so they have awareness and choice rather than triggers, fears, and reactions. They have a sense of creating a kind of a we space in their organizations, collective intelligence, collective innovation. The power and hierarchy is completely redistributed compared to a normal triangle. And then their sense of awareness of the world and everything that's connected to their business, so all the stakeholders, and their sense of responsibility about what am I and we creating here. They tend to have, rather than a pyramid and a kind of they have this. It's like they're holding the context for their organizations, and I think they're doing three things. They're creating psychological safety for their people, so it feels okay to contribute my ideas because the culture I'm in is not going to ridicule me for them. I don't have to keep them to myself. They are practicing curiosity. They're asking people for ideas. They're role modeling, being interested. So people are willing to bring forward their views. So you start getting this diversity of thought and ideas. And the third thing is that they are creating a very inspiring context, like a sense of purpose, of course, that's so big in organizations right now. Inspiring context that people feel they want to contribute to, their values are connected to it. They can see that their work has got an impact and a role. It's not just something that come and turn a handle every day.
Right.
And I think that's the challenge of leaders. Like, how do you create a sense of inspiring context that people feel connected to? Context. And the leaders I've spoken to who do this, who hold this space, you don't have to be like at the front. Sometimes you do have to go, this is the way, but often it's about doing this. They have a lot more time in the day. They say to me their diaries are empty because rather than trying to micromanage everything and have to be in every single meeting, like controlling, making sure it's all good, they're actually going, well, my job is sort of to make sure that the context is alive. My job is to be available if people need to talk. I'm really there to kind of like hear the tones of the organization, maybe pick up an idea here, try it out here, see if it's working. And someone described it last week as they're the beekeepers rather than the bees. This great metaphor, right? The sense of like, you're the beekeeper. You can't be a conscious leader if you're in the hive.
Yes.
You kind of have to be the beekeeper, calm, just checking out the system, the ecosystem, seeing what's going on, tending a bit here, tending a bit there.
And you've just described something that to me has as its foundation trust. Because if that leader doesn't trust that the people are, wanting to be bees in this hive, then they're what Gallup is noticing still is that there are still people who are consciously sabotaging their organizations because they don't feel trust or respect or whatever it is that's missing. So the engagement of these companies that Gallup is still studying have disengagement as their foundation.
And it's extraordinary. I do think it starts from, in my view, the trust starts from the top.
Okay.
If you mistrust and control people, are they going to perform any better? Or are you going to be able to leverage the potential in your company? No. There was a lovely example of someone I spoke to who said someone in his company had done something distrustful. She had taken one of the company cars and given it to her son to go off to college.
Oh, wow.
So it was a sackable offense, and she did get sacked. And everybody on the board was saying, "Oh, this is why we need a policy." And he said, "No. Let's not, because one person has done something, assume that everybody is untrustworthy. Let's take a different kind of approach. Let's actually assume people are trustworthy and deal with what it is rather than try and control things." In my experience, I'm not sure people don't come to there are not many people who come to work wanting to do a bad job. A lot of people kind of turn up to work wanting to, in my experience, wanting to be happy, wanting to enjoy their work, wanting to feel fulfilled, wanting to contribute, wanting to have their ideas heard. So how do we create an environment where that can happen? And I think trust is absolutely essential for it.
Oh, Gina, we have to do this on a regular basis because we're talking for an hour.
There we are, hour gone.
And this is just the beginning. I don't know, maybe we need to have a series of a podcast series in conscious awareness and leadership. And
you just let me know.
Okay.
It's always good talking to you because we dance together and great conversations come out of it. So thank you for having me along.
You create for me and the space that I hold for you. And that's where the mastermind comes out, the best of both of us.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you for having me along.
If people wanted to get a hold of you, are you available to have more clubs? Or how would they find you? What's the best way?
Oh, so I'm one of these multiple email addresses. You can just reach me, gina.hayden@icloud.com.
Okay.
It's the simple one. It'll get through to me. It's kind of my personal email address. Just reach out.
And how about a website where they can learn more about you? I have
sure.
GCFCL.com.
GCFCL.com, the Global Center for Conscious Leadership.com. You can reach me at sphereconsulting.org or the Conscious Leadership Consultancy.com.
So a lot of ways.
A lot of ways, different themes, but if you want to get hold of me by email, name.surname@icloud.com, that's going to always get through to me.
Easy enough. Gina, wow, I just feel better when I'm with you, whether that's virtually. It can only be virtually right now. Thank you for allowing me to be with you today.
Yeah, thanks, Jodie. I always love talking to you. Take care.
See you again.
Bye now.
Bye-bye.